Welcome to the virtual artist panel discussion happening tonight for our online Pride Month exhibition, Thicc-ening the Narrative, which is guest curated by Deshun Peoples, who will also be our moderator tonight. So I'm Tori. I'm the exhibitions and marketing assistant at Clay Arts Center. The participating artists tonight include Carletta Williams, Gerald Brown, V. Walton, and Shaun Mallonga. We're very excited to hear their thoughts. And I want to thank all of you for your attendance tonight. We are excited to share with you tonight. So the first being Thicc-ening the Narrative is currently on our website. And this is an exhibition which is celebrating Pride Month that asks the artist to reflect on their intersecting identities through ceramics. The work featured includes both sculptural and functional ceramics and formed by the artist's intersecting identities of race, queerness, and body size. Participating artists include Carletta Williams, Shaun Mallonga, V. Walton, Haley Jimenez, Grace Gray Gittleman, and Gerald Brown. So now I'm going to introduce V. Walton.
Hi, everyone. My name is V. Walton. I'm a ceramic and multidisciplinary artist based out of Baltimore, Maryland. I got my BFA in ceramics at Towson University and then got my MFA at Alfred University. My work is a combination of large-scale sculptures through hand building, incorporating the figure in a representational way, but then also through abstracted forms using the vessel and other materials such as various textiles and bringing in natural elements to the work as well. I'm really exploring installation, and this work was actually in a group of other vessels in an installation, and I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
So we're now going to introduce Gerald Brown.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gerald, based in Philadelphia, originally from Chicago. I'm also a multidisciplinary artist, mostly working in ceramic installation forms. Yeah, a lot of my work really leans on abstraction to be able to create my own language around Blackness and thinking about the complexities of the strange fruit in relationship to multifaceted Black identities. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and can't wait to talk more tonight.
We're now going to introduce Carletta Williams.
I'm Carletta. I'm from Columbus, Georgia. I currently live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I did my undergrad at Wesleyan College and then moved right away to complete my MFA, and I have one more year here. My work relies heavily on installations through found materials and through the archive, and looking closely at Southern Black lives and what the material culture is surrounding that.
And we're going to introduce Shaun Mallonga now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shaun Mallonga. My pronouns are they, he. I am a ceramic artist, originally based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I received my fine arts diploma at Langara College in Vancouver. I did my bachelor's in Calgary, Alberta at the Alberta University of the Arts. And I'm currently doing my master's degree over at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm excited for this talk.
And finally, we're going to introduce Deshun Peoples, who is the guest curator of Thicc-ening the Narrative and also tonight's moderator.
Thank you. Hey, everybody, I'm Deshun. I am from Chicago. I got my BA from Bates College up in Lewiston, Maine. I double majored in studio art and rhetorical theory and criticism. I got my MFA from RISD back in 2021. And I just recently finished getting my essentially MSW from University of Chicago last month. So yeah, I am glad to be here in this space. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to curate this space and to bring together all you lovely folks that have intentional, robust conversations about what it means to live a full life, to navigate the full extent of all that we walk through the world with, and to hold space for that. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, that's, I can talk a little bit briefly more about my work to say that I do work that is largely vessel-based. I'm exploring some sculptural installation dimensions, but my outward-facing work is largely vessel-based, and I explore autoethnography. So through personal narratives, I paint pictures and elaborate on stories that kind of broad stroke talk about cultural experiences of largely Black and queer folks.
Okay, so now we are going to kick off the artist panel discussion. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'll just finally show our sponsors for tonight's, for the exhibition. And now I'm going to stop sharing and just pass it over to Deshun to begin the talk.
All right. Cool. Well, it's great to see you all. I'm glad this is here. This is happening. It's a real thing now. Thank you all for being in the trenches and figuring all this out. It's been a lot. I know a lot of communication, a lot of email following up. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited. I'll just start off kind of getting your general thoughts about the exhibition and kind of what led you to be here. So what were some of your initial thoughts around the exhibition and what ultimately led you to say yes to the call? And I'll just pose that to everybody and kind of share as you feel compelled to. In no particular order. Or I can call on people if that feels
I'm
better.
gonna go. Don't you do it. I think I first of all, it was you, so I would never say no. And then I looked at every intersectionality that you listed, and it was almost like a check mark. And I had never been given the space to do that. And so it was an immediate yes, I think, for me because of those reasons.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree with that too. That was like my way coming into it. I had the absolute pleasure of meeting you for the studio visit. I think it was like the best studio visit I had this whole academic year, because I felt like I could just be myself. I could like, and that's such a hard thing. It's just like I feel like that's like a whole like journey of self-discovery. But I saw the show invitation and seeing all the intersections that were being honored in this space, I felt like I could put my full self into it. And that's what this is, such an invitation to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that what really spoke to me is how, during Pride, there's many images about what it means to celebrate queerness. And I think this show has a very comprehensive intersectional lens, which only to me gets deeper at the root of what queerness is. It makes me think about the infamous Bell Hooks quote, which I will not botch, but thinking about queerness beyond just like who you're having sex with, but more this like intersectional, very radical lens. And I think, there's a lot of things that make queerness just feel like an aesthetic, but it's really just a way of how you exist and move through the world, how you love community, how you show up for community. And yeah, just like what everybody has already said, like the level of thought and complexity that you injected into this show and what you fought for to make this show feel not only authentic to us, but like really pushing back against these other narratives that try to reduce parts of our identity down to just a flag, a month, etc. So yeah, I also you hit me up, so it felt like a no-brainer too, because I love how you get down. So yeah, easy.
Yeah, for me, I just respect you and your work. And I was honored to have been invited. So yeah, I also didn't want to say no. But the show's needed, right? And I think there's very few curators or creatives that are willing to go and be this direct about radical body politics, particularly around Blackness, right? And so this is just like a really rare but vital opportunity. And so I'm grateful that all of us were able to take part in it today.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I'll kind of go into broader questions and I'll bring this back around to specific questions about the work that you all are making individually. So the first question I wanted to kind of pose to the group is, in what ways, if any, have you seen liberatory embodied experiences of people who identify in similar ways as you do? And how do you hold space for joy inside and outside of your studio? So I want to start us off on a note, kind of thinking about liberatory practice and joy as like a cornerstone of how we have to find space to move through the world. And wondering if we can kind of speak to how that has impacted both our studio life and then other things that we do outside the studio that are likely just as enriching and fulfilling and important to who we are.
I can jump in. So I find joy when I hear like the unheard stories, where it's like there's some things that I've lived through where sometimes it feels so insular and like so personal, and I'm just, and you can almost think it's just about you, even though we all know it's not, you know? But then whether it's through media or someone else's artwork, you get exposed and you realize like, oh, this just is a ripple of our greater community. And like that brings me joy, just realizing that we're not alone, and that also there's people taking up space. I love when we take up space. So I'm like, just do the damn thing, you know? So that brings me joy. And really fostering community and relationships with like-minded people, you know, who live it and also make it their life's work to create safe spaces and to amplify our voices. So yeah.
I'll say I feel it most, that liberation, when I feel like I'm most connected to my mom and my grandparents and all the Black women who came before me. And I think because I grew up so far outside of the art world that I come at it at a really different angle, that every act of resistance is an act of liberation for me. So when I'm in the studio and I'm listening to this 80s music that I grew up listening, that my mom would sing as she like made these cakes that like only she knows the recipes to. And I feel so connected to that. And that's where I find the most joy, especially when I have created in spaces that weren't filled with people that looked like me. You find those spaces in your making, in that act of resistance and liberation, I think.
Absolutely.
A lot of my sources of joy come from queer pop culture and like consuming it. I think from I do like it'll be like a celebratory thing for me and my like close family and friends to watch like a Drag Race episode or Drag Race Philippines specifically. Like I really love Turing, who's just this like beautiful fat Filipina drag artist who like incorporates beauty into her work as well as dance being a central part of it. And I also like from the main series, I really love drag artist Mistress Isabel Brooks, because I just love seeing like an unapologetic fat drag queen who's like commanding the room with her personality and is sexy and funny. So that's what gives me queer joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I feel like music is a really big force. Like I think it's how I constantly push what it feels like I need to be in that moment and listen to what I want, you know, or exist and show up how I want. I think a lot of my music has been expanding lately to be more encompassing of like these different fluid gender energies that I am like feeling like a vessel for. And so I think for me, it's both a lens to think about what freedom looks like in the now, especially in a world full of immediate chaos and violence, like especially right now at an all-time high, it feels. But then also just like indulge in things that just feel really good, you know? It just like what feels free. Sometimes it's like about deconstructing and decolonizing, and sometimes it's just like a lot of heavy lifting, but that's not totally the encompassing of what liberatory practices can really exist as.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you all. I'm going to keep moving through the questions here, if that's all right. I'm trying to be mindful of time. I know we can stay on these questions for a while, but I'm trying to get us through these lists as much as possible so that we can get as much of our experience and the fullness of all that we bring to the space into the room. So I'm going to move us right along to the next question, if that's okay. So the next question is about stereotypes. And I think we can think about stereotypes in a few different ways. And I'll kind of leave it up to you to kind of define what that means to you. But I'll kind of keep a general marker of stereotypes as like a way that people reduce experiences to a particular way that they imagine that it happens across people who identify in a similar way. And thinking about stereotypes as a kind of harm or violence against the body, against the experience that prohibits you from receiving access to spaces or to resources. I'm wondering in what ways have stereotypes, contending with stereotypes, embodying, reclaiming, dismantling, engaging with stereotypes in whatever ways has been a part of your work, your scholarship, or your lived experience.
That's a super hard question. Yeah.
I know.
This is definitely not enough time. I'm gonna try to keep mine brief. I feel like for me, so I'm gonna try to think about myself real quick and then like pivot back to the work. I feel like stereotypes that show up for me, particularly thinking about this lens of queerness, is like feeling like gender queerness and queer sexuality, like though they occupy a lot of same spaces, they're really different, and like feeling like not having enough room for my gender fluidity and or my queerness to kind of my sexual queerness to exist simultaneously. And so I think what's really difficult about stereotypes is that, you know, it's one thing to be fighting against the world, but like you internalize those also, and you are very self-critical and projecting and being really short with yourself and your own experiences. And so I think it's really, really difficult to not only constantly shed that layer and keep up a barrier against the world projecting only to you, but constantly doing that work for yourself. I feel like my work though keeps me really dynamic and fluid. A lot of my work in the past, I love the natural color of clay and often like chose to fire my pieces on glaze just to really showcase that natural like high iron aesthetic, especially thinking about African diasporic lineages, like the color of the clay just felt like a one-to-one connection. But I've been really trying to encompass color and like think about how that can create a more dynamic, non-monolithic perspective about the ways I'm thinking about my Blackness and my gender fluidity, my queerness, thinking about all these different things. And so I feel like, you know, the work, the studio is always a way to kind of like be kind to myself and try to show up for me in ways that I'm not seeing that in the world, and then figure out how to pivot forward and make that outward so it can create community and just exist beyond just my brain in this small safe space specific for me.
Anyone else like to take a crack at it?
Oh, you go, Shaun.
I feel like I contend with a lot of like sort of the stereotypes of being seen as like an amicable, like gay Filipino, like in terms of like, oh, this is somebody that we can, especially when you're fat, it's like, this is somebody we can get laughs out of. This is somebody that we can feel safe with at the cost of their own comfort. I feel like I'm still like working on creating better boundaries with people, especially being in spaces that are predominantly white, where I take some of that back for myself. And well, I'm trying. I don't know. It's really hard. It's just like part of it is like I feel like when it shows up in the work in terms of like color and narrative and whimsy, and like some of it is kind of like wildly delirious. I feel like some part of me is like taking the work of fiction, looking at Filipino pop culture, looking at how like Gothic art is sort of like a whimsical take on like Catholic, like Catholicism, which I grew up with. And it's like I feel like for me to like take that imposed delirium or that look that people have, that gaze that people put on me and expect me to do a performance, I feel like with my work I reclaim that. I try to make it seem that my voice is there and that I'm speaking. I don't have to perform for them. I'm actually performing for myself and for the other people who want to be out there too.
I wish I had like some type of snaps. I feel like I'm gonna like nod my head off, but like, I think about it academically, and I hate to say that because it's real life, it's history. And then I think about it personally, like to how it applies to me. And I think about like what it boils down to is you're not human anymore. These stereotypes become who you are. And so I think about like Sarah Bartman and like human zoos and all these different like colonial methods. And then I think about me being in these situations that I'm no longer human to you. You don't see me as the person I am. And when you don't treat me as human, then anything goes, right? Discrimination goes, all these different things happen. And there's nowhere for me to become a person anymore. And I think it becomes very dangerous. And that's something that I think is like always in my work. And I share that same sentiment. Like my work is like beautiful and pink. And I like to say it's girly pop and all these different things. But it's like real, it's trauma induced. It's these patterns that were like used for violence and things like that. And if you see them, you recognize them in the work, I think.
I gotta jump in. No. I was like, maybe next question. I'm constantly challenging stereotype. And Shaun, you were talking about performance, like stereotype is really coming down to, can you perform this expectation that was put on you? It's nothing to do with the person.
It's like it's social currency, and it's like it was imposed on us.
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
No, but like, I'm like, yes.
I get them, B.
So I think as a person and as an artist, I'm constantly challenging what you like, the assumptions that are made about me and the assumptions that like my community faces as well. And so I think about that along the lines of I'm constantly challenging stereotypes against disabled people within the Black community, because I think we experience stereotypes of white people and non-Black people make about us, but then how Black people perceive disabled people. It's like this like this tornado effect that just like this cycle that never ends. And so what's important for me is really talking about I want to make, when I talk about the figure, I'm really trying to give life to these personal narratives where it's like, no, these are people. We're not objects, we're not tropes. We have lives and emotions, and really exploring like the pain and beauty of those lived experiences. And so, yeah, it's just really challenging. It's really challenging expectation along all lines, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. It seems like many of you have spoken to kind of multiple parts of this question, right? The part being kind of this intentional engagement with like different parts of yourself as this thing that kind of grounds you in the practice and kind of offers this like oasis and like sometimes a sea of a bunch of chaos. And then also this like this contending with these expectations that are constantly placed upon you extra communally, inter-communally, and intra-communally, right? Even within those communities that you have close ties to, there's still an expectation of performance of a particular kind of way to move through that identity that you're also contending with. And then we talked about dehumanization, right? And how dehumanizing it becomes to have to perform in that way, to have to be limited in that expression. And I think I'm just wondering kind of what are some of the ways that you have been able to, and maybe I can like point this towards specific work, but what are some of the ways that you've been able to kind of think about the fullness of that humanity in the way that you make, in the way that you create these kind of oases in your studio? And so I'll start with you, V. And thinking about the work that you submitted for this exhibition, Resistance Vessel #2, that there's a particular kind of illegibility, right, to the figure that we are presented with through the kind of like netted textile, right? There's a way that it isn't tied to a specific sexual orientation, a specific physical body, a specific kind of way that we're meant to receive and label a person, right? That it kind of can flow between these different things that we think about with biological sex, that we think about with identity. And I'm wondering if that's a way that you're trying to contend with fullness of a human experience.
It's funny. I really perceived this to be a trans vessel.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually look at the anatomy of the vessel, I'm really exploring, like, there's a phallus, there's breasts, like I've in that body of work, I made several resistance vessels. They're all tied to nets that are tethered to hardware on the wall. And so I'm really kind of exploring, pushing, like, I really wanted to almost give all these vessels various identities without locking them in to that. It's very fluid. It's very just like, it's just like almost subtle. Like you said, you didn't even notice, but I'm also using some of the aesthetics of the work as a way to resist these stereotypes. So in that work, I also really utilize thorns. So the phallus almost becomes this like ambiguous thorn, right? And so I'm really talking about like challenging this perception of the body, challenging this perception of gender, and really pushing against like the way that's piercing this almost encasing that has like trapped it and restricted it to the wall. And so all of those nets are really talking about body restriction in every different way along the lines of race, gender, sexuality. And so I really liked that engagement. If you look at the net, the thorns are piercing through the net. So throughout it, it's really like tearing through and also just showing just really being aggressive about the way that we take up space, and I also like, no, I am here, like this is who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering about those parts where it kind of protrudes through, right? There seems to be a kind of violence, right, at that intersection, right, where it's kind of
There's
ripping through. And I'm wondering if that's something that you're kind of also trying to bring into the conversation about bodily containment.
Yeah, I think all of these stereotypes, these assumptions are dangerous. They are meant to make us other, and society ultimately wants to remove that, wants to hide it, wants to make that invisible, and sometimes that visibility leads to death. So there's real consequences for people that are living at multiple intersections, right? So it's I think it's actually a reflection of the cost, or the that clash when you are living in a body that is against societal norms, and how visible that can be, and that tension, um and the force that's required to continue to be present, to continue to live your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's a theme throughout my work, is just really talking how insidious it is to associate people, or put the stereotype of normalcy on others. Because what does that mean? What are we actually, who are we referring to?
And who gets to define
Who
that?
gets to, right. And so I think that's a thing that will never go away, and it's just kind of continuing. But with that body of work, it was like very direct. I was like, no, this is white supremacy at work, and it's really impacting truly in the most sense, like Black, trans, disabled, and queer people. We are really on the front lines of a lot of these issues. So yeah.
And I think in kind of following that line of kind of thinking through work that maybe straddles a boundary or plays around with gendered or biological sex oriented work. I'm thinking about your work, Gerald, and I'm thinking about how there are parts of it that kind of feel bodily, but not of a specific body, in ways that you also kind of play in this like realm of like maybe trans object, maybe commentary on the flexibility or the kind of the wide rangingness of what bodies get to be, and if that's something that you're also trying to contend with specifically in the studio.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Vic, you just demolished that, bro. I don't even know how I'm gonna follow that up. But I think that, several people on this call, I really have loved everybody's work and the way you push these boundaries. And I think, V, you really have always been somebody that I think about as I'm moving forward and thinking about stuff that's showing up for me in my studio. Like I feel like there's just an ongoing desire for fluidity and duality. I feel like I've always been operating from that perspective since I was little, being, a little Black girl named Gerald growing up in Chicago. Like I think duality was just inherently a part of who I am. And I've always struggled with binaries. To go back to the previous question, I always struggle with stereotypes because I never really align perfectly in a lot of these ways. And so I actually, when I started working in ceramics and wanted to start using my work to kind of honor Black folks, I was actually trying to do figurative work. And for me, it just felt like I couldn't encapsulate enough of who I am and what I think about in my community in the work. And so I started thinking about a totally new framework, thinking about something that's inherently Black in language. So thinking about, the song Strange Fruit. And, as of lately, that fluidity has only grown in intensity in terms of like, both on the perspective of how I built them. And so like what's really big for me is like what it looks like externally is mirrored quite identically inside. And so the way I'm pinching, it's an inherent relationship between the interior and the exterior, which I think is often denied to a lot of like Black and brown folks. And so for me, pushing it further, again, like gender fluidity has always been a part of my life, even though sometimes people don't clock how I move in that specific language. You know, I think that the way I want to depict Blackness has always been about that. It's always been trying to give, you know, more space to fully embody and show up how we truly desire, even when language feels too limiting in that way. And so, you know, abstraction has been a very forgiving process for me discovering that. I think, so there's two pieces. The one that is a little bit bigger, that doesn't have clays on it, you know, that one is of a more broader frame than like a lot of my forms, I would say. And I don't think that that was inherently something that I was aware of at the time. As I was kind of navigating a lot of my health stuff, I was thinking about the weight of my body and having to, you know, on a subconscious level, endure a lot of like changes to my body, you know, in terms of like gaining a lot of weight because of the medicine, and like this idea of being very public but in hiding about this circumstance that I'm enduring. You know, I think a lot of that started to show up and change how I made the forms. And then the other form that kind of has more glaze on it, has like this kind of fan, I think is how I'm trying to pivot back but still create that visual weight. I think previously, a couple of years ago, a lot of my forms felt very unintentionally very slender and very like not encapsulating of that presence and that reality of the bodies we hold, even if they're not all on the same spectrum of what the ways like we think about, you know, thicker bodies. And so I think for me, it was a level of like wanting to communicate that humanness like in this show, because I do have work that feels more maybe like visibly on the nose queer. I felt like this work I wanted it to feel like there was room for existing beyond what is recognizably performable.
Yeah, thank you. And then that has me thinking about your work, Shaun, in terms of trying to kind of imagine, kind of pushing boundaries of what people kind of like can see in the work or are able to take from the work, specifically with kind of the histories of mythology that you're drawing upon to kind of build these fantastical worlds, right? There's a way in which you're asking the viewer to like see this thing and like imagine newness into it. And I'm wanting you to kind of speak a little bit more to like how you go about creating these worlds and the ways that you're thinking about the body and the work that you put in the exhibition, specifically looking at the more figurative work as it's kind of a complement to a lot of the function work that you've made before.
Thank you. I feel so currently in my practice, well, my practice has always been using fiction to be a placeholder for affirmation, speculation, and survival. Growing up, sorry, I was wondering if I was muted. Growing up, my siblings and I were like sort of formed like, I feel like when I was living in the Philippines and I was quite young, my siblings and I, my eldest brother would be playing like Final Fantasy VIII, and we would all like crowd around and watch him play and also do the voice parts for any of like the pros. And there was just something for me that was like so captivating and so mysterious about like like being part of the fantasy and the visualization of this fantastic world that I felt like we could fill ourselves in. But then at the same time, growing up, you start to notice the distance of those white beauty standards of these characters that are in these worlds. And I feel like a lot of my work uses fantasy and the body, like the realness of my body, to disrupt a lot of like Eurocentric views on what romanticism or what fantasy looks like. and putting my own real experiences. So I feel like I fluctuate with like Gothic art history references, Filipino folklore, and queer pop culture to like bring all of like the sweetness and the bitterness together to make it seem something that is fantastical, but also so real to me. One of my favorite artists, Linda Berry, who's like this white Filipina comic book artist who teaches at the University of Wisconsin, I believe, Madison. She wrote this book called the name is escaping me. Is this it, or this is it? It's about the image and sort of like trusting when you make art, there's sort of this like feeling of losing yourself in the image, but in fact you're using the image to find the deeper parts of yourself. And what I liked about what was in that book was she said something about using fiction not as a way of escaping, but as a way of staying with the world and surviving. And so I feel like that's like a lot of my mission when it comes to making work. And recently I've made more of a pivot towards sculptural figurine works, which for me feel a lot more alive in the sense that I don't have to create a void to serve anyone with vessels. Like I can close up the space, I can distort the object, I can make an obstacle for somebody, or also an entry. That's also an entry point at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and then Carletta, I'm thinking about your work too, and I'm thinking about the ways in which I think similarly to something that Shaun was saying, that you're taking these images, right, that are really kind of loaded with a history, and you're asking us to imagine them in a particular way that gives light to something that's really personal to you and to your experience. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to kind of the iconography that I think really adorns a lot of the spaces that you've created, and kind of what that means to you, where those things come from, and just kind of like how all those things come together to build this picture that's really important for us to contend with now.
I go back and forth all the time because I don't know if I get it right. I feel like I'm always like stuck in between this space of like how far can I push it and how much of myself am I showing? And so I think a lot about whose story I'm telling and why I'm telling it, and am I telling the full picture? And then I realized, like, I feel like I have like 10,000 sticky notes in my head, and like they're all connected in this web, and they're all saying like, you can't talk about Black women without talking about queer histories. You can't talk about Black women without talking about the violence that Black men bestow upon Black women. You can't talk about Black men without talking about colonial, like all of these things exist in this space. And one, is it my job to tell this story? And I think if I'm like showing all of these images, then it has to be because I've like taken a part in this story. And so I'm always thinking about things that existed in my childhood, and in what way can I challenge the way that they shaped the Southern Black home. I say the Southern Black home all the time because it's what I am, it's what I know. And so these like colonial frames and colonial images, in what way does that speak to the adornment of Black women, but also speaks to like the privilege to be able to adorn their homes? And you think about the segregated South and the ways in which these materials were passed about. And so I'm always thinking about the way, how can I say this thing through adornment? And I don't know if I get it right all the time, but what I do try to do is make sure that I'm telling the complete story and telling one that's filled with history, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe that's a testament to a commitment to the way that you want to honor these stories, right? That you're even asking the question, like, did I get it right? Did I do the full justice, right? That there's a way in which being invested in that question grounds us in the collective story that we're trying to tell. And I think that's a powerful kind of bookend to what you were expressing. I'm looking at time here and wondering if I have time for another question or if we're open to Q&A. This is me slightly like deferring to Claire at Center to ask this question.
Yeah, so we have about 10, 12 minutes left. So far, there haven't been any questions entered into the chat, so I think maybe you can just keep going with your questions. And then maybe around 7:55-ish, I'll kind of do another time check.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so I'll kind of jump ahead to my last question, which is about fat justice. I'm going to read a couple of kind of lengthy quotes. I'll hopefully kind of be able to get through them. I think I've emailed you all a copy of them, so hopefully you have some time to kind of sit with them at least a little bit. So yeah, the first quote is from Belly of the Beast, The Politics of Anti-Fatness and Anti-Blackness by Deshaun L. Harrison. The quote is, "Health in name and action has always existed to dominate and to subjugate. The medical industry, the healthcare industry, and the diet industry all exist to maintain a culture intended to discipline those whose bodies refuse to, and for many simply cannot, conform to the standards of health." So that's the first quote, and I'll read the second quote, and then I'll let us kind of talk about how that informs our practice or kind of things that come up for us. The second quote is from You Have the Right to Remain Fat by Virgie Tovar. And Tovar writes, "The real problem is that we live in a country that promotes size-based bigotry. The real problem is a culture that uses weight as a proxy for humanity and morality. The real problem is that women don't feel like we can eat what we want, or wear what we want, or live how we want. And yet we are told and we believe that we can fix this existential crisis through controlling portion size. The real problem is that our culture is maintained through a vitriolic matrix of racism, sexism, misogyny, transphobia, ableism, healthism, and classism that erodes the physical, spiritual, and mental health of all people. And yet we are told and we believe that the problem is that we aren't trying hard enough. Diet culture teaches women that we need to lose weight by any means necessary, thereby reducing us to mere bodies who either do or do not conform to externally set standards. This is dehumanization, plain and simple." And so I'll let us kind of take that in, and if any thoughts come up around those quotes as relates to your practice or how you move through the world that you think would be helpful to kind of share space with them in this time that we have left. And I can also slightly broaden out the question to say, like, how has topics of fat justice come into any of the circles that you are a part of?
I think for me, I've always been a thicker child all my entire life, and I didn't realize how much that affected me until I got older. It was just something that, like, my mom would be like, "You're beautiful. What, move on," you know? And like, I didn't realize until I got into circles how othered I was. Like, I grew up around Black children. I grew up around thicker Black children. My sister, like my parents, my aunties. So like, I think about that, and I think about the ways that I have like shrunken myself in these spaces in order to answer to a question that I didn't even know I was being asked. And I think about like how violent that was how violent that situation is to be in those predicaments and not have a way to answer because I didn't know I was othered. And also like being in relationships with people in different communities, you just answer to all these different things that you don't even realize that you're answering to or you're fighting against.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does anyone else want to share thoughts on that?
I think for me, like you and I were talking about this when you were in the inception phase of finalizing like the curatorial statement, and what always stuck out to me about wrestling with all these intersections and thinking about just this pervasive concept of fat phobia throughout everything in the United States it's like this, it for me boils back down to desirability and like how do we process and give resources to people who we think are desirable and worthy of impact, kindness, care, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, like a lot of that becomes so multi-headed. I start like not being able to see through the lines with which nasty form of bigotry is really leading the pack with this one. You know, I think being in white academic spaces and then being somebody who like has feminine characteristics but feels fluid, who is bigger body, who feels like they're wrestling with a lot of these forms in which people are expecting me to manipulate, and I'm placing expectation on myself to manipulate my body to be able to con and connive and feel like people give me grace and things of that sort. And it just feels like there's this overwhelming condition of being hyper apologetic and hyper just like passive and apathy. Like I think Shaun was kind of talking about this earlier. Like, and I really felt some of the things just like people expect this from you. And then, you know, like you start to expect that from yourself. And then when, you know, of course, forms of violence continue to occur, you're like having this self-gaslighting impact of like, am I able to advocate for myself? Am I able to push back? Will I lose access to things that I need and want? Because I'm challenging that desirability that I feel like is being put out on me. And so, yeah, I don't have no words. But I think that that's what's really like always, I feel like comes down to a lot of that. And I do think like from the quotes you read, like it's always on my mind about if I don't perform this correctly, will I lose access to all the things I need?
Mhm. Look, reading those quotes and also thinking about desirability as Gerald brought up. The piece that I have for the show, Ozempic Face Pod, I felt like there was something in me that was seeking permission to make that piece because it's very personal to me because I am diabetic, type 2, and I take Ozempic for my health, and there's all this stuff that's attached to it in terms of like why it's expensive, what people expect from you now that you take Ozempic, and also like the satire of like you're gonna have Ozempic face, like there's like so like I feel like a lot of like that piece that I made is sort of like trying to have an innocent look at it, but also still like it's also satirical, but it's also like critical in terms of like thinking it's like Ozempic, it's like there's this valorizing of like beauty in it in terms of like making fatness like invisible and like as well as like racialized people's beauty invisible in that sense because it is like valorizing one aesthetic. um and so like I just have like a lot of like difficult emotions with health in terms of like talking to a doctor where it's like, well, this medicine has stabilized my blood sugar, but you're still expecting me to be a certain weight.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's like art, like I'm hearing stuff about like health in every size, but I go to my doctor and they have this to tell me, which is like disappointing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that Ozempic in particular, right, has a pervasive way of being a totem to how we can now more readily regulate size, right? That it's been approved for people for weight loss, even though it's a diabetes drug, right? And so there are ways that the medical industry has definitely been intentional about how they wanted to promote fitness as health instead of something else that is culturally constructed around desirability.
Okay, I just wanted to do a quick time check. It's getting close to 8, and also there was a Q&A question. If any of you felt inclined to answer it. So Dom asks, how does the idea of sincerity show up in what each of you make?
I'll take a shot at that one. I think I like am always when you are surrounded by people who make work and are so disingenuous in the work that they make, it scares you. Like, I look around and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to tell the real story. I want to tell the truth, and how I feel, because I care about it, because it's real, because I'm speaking from all these different intersectionalities, and the violence that comes from misstepping, from misspeaking, is something that I can't afford to do, one, as a Black woman, but again, because it's damaging. And I think sincerity in that, and sincerity in the making, to speak about where I'm from. I talk about the Black South because I was born and raised there. And these ways that has like shaped me and shaped every single thing that's around me. So yeah, I think the fear of being not real scares me into being sincere in my work.
Yeah. If you're talking, V, I think you're still muted.
I really resonate with that. There's nothing wrong with making for making's sake, people, but I think it is incredibly dangerous to talk about the things, these serious lived experiences, without your own lived experience and without research. It's just, then we're just dealing with imagination and stereotype, right? And so I think for me, like I really reflect on my life. And that's where my work really comes from. And then I really expand outward, and I think about other people's experiences that can resonate with mine, but then also are different. I think it's dangerous to only focus on yourself when you're speaking for a community of people. And so the more you can talk to people, the better, and the more you can read about the experiences of people who have lived before you and with you are important. But people will know when it's not authentic. They can sense it. And I don't want to be an artist. I don't want people to feel that way about my work. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I think we've kind of come to an end, to a conclusion of the virtual artist panel discussion. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for your attendance. I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming and attending tonight. We're delighted to provide a platform for queer and LGBTQI plus voices. And I want to thank Deshun for working with us to bring this exhibition into being. And I hope that all of you have a great evening. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you all.